Hello everyone, welcome to my build guide video. Today, I'm going to showcase my Poison Rapid Fire Trapper slash Grenadier build, which I found very interesting and fun to play, and it's pretty viable to push tier 100, and I think you can also kill Uber Lilith with it. Obviously, you are gonna need some adjustments, especially with your gear and aspects, but today I'm only going to talk about the build for pushing tier 100. I'm not really interested in attempting Uber Lilith with this build, since there are many other builds out there that kill Uber Lilith far easier. So, if you wanna kill Uber Lilith, I'm afraid this might not be the right build for you. Okay, without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Well, first of all, this build guide is the final version where it is at level 100 and has full Paragon points. If you are still leveling, I suggest you to check out my previous video on my YouTube channel. I have made several videos for my progression to level 100. I also made the D4 planner, so you can follow along and grind until you find the gear for the final version. Links down in the video description. Now, let's talk about the skill tree. First, we take Puncture with Fundamental Puncture, mostly for the vulnerable application, the slow, and some really nice lucky hit chance. Next, we take Rapid Fire with Improved Rapid Fire. It single-handedly solves our energy issues, so we don't have to worry about them. It's just really nice quality of life compared to the advanced rapid fire. Now we have Sturdy just for more damage reduction. We take Caltrops with Methodical Caltrops for the chills. Now you have to understand that by taking Methodical Caltrops, you are converting your slow into chills. So you are losing the slow. But with a combination of Frostbitten Aspect and Exposure, we are always insta-freezing the enemies. Next we have Concussive, just for the proc knockdown basically. Next thing we have Concealment. I think Concealment is the best in slot for the ranged build. And if you compare them with Shadow Step, you are forced to flank the enemies and you have more tendencies to get surrounded by the enemies. Whereas with Concealment, you can reset your positioning, throw your trap, and wait for the cooldown for your other skill. Now let's talk about Dark Shroud. This is our primary defense with level 12 Dark Shroud plus perfectly roll and shrouding aspect. I believe you can get up to like 74% damage reduction at full stacks. It is 74% on top of your armor damage reduction, which is huge. But you typically don't want to get hit very often, so you don't deplete your stacks very quick. And we also use the Ambrose aspect for easy shroud generation. But you kinda need to get used to positioning your character and paying a close attention to your shroud stacks. And then we pick Subverting Dark Shroud just for the extra movement speed. Next we have the Poison Trap, which we are using mostly for triggering the Trickery Brutal Heart, which can taunt the enemy and group the mobs. We also take Countering Poison Trap for more uptime on our Poison Imbuement, since Bursting Venoms is no longer proccing the Toxic Pool that much after they fix the aspect. And next we take Poison Imbuement, and this is our primary damage dealer. There are a lot of misconceptions about how this skill works and the mechanics involved with it. One thing that you have to understand is that the only thing that Poison Imbuement does is it modifies the triggered skill and change the damage type. such as physical damage, into poison damage, and then it applies damage over time based on the base damage from the triggered skill. So I think TI never deals hit damage by itself and only deals damage over time. And the thing that confuses me is that it has a lucky hit chance, which is contradictory since damage over time cannot proc lucky hit. There is a reason they call it a lucky hit, because it is a lucky hit which only works with hit. Now, because we are focusing on damage over time, the DPS scaling is a little bit different than a hit-based build. There are several modifiers that don't work with damage over time. And since the purpose of this video is more about showing my build rather than explaining the mechanics, I'm not going to discuss too much about them since it probably took like 30 minutes to explain the mechanics themselves. I will probably make a separate video for this, but for now, I will explain some of the affixes that work with damage over time later in the gear and aspects sections of the video. Next, we take a blended poison imbuement so we can scale our damage over time with critical chance. One thing to remember is that the crit damage still does nothing to our damage over time. Blended poison imbuement only multiplies based on whether our hit is crit or not. And a higher crit damage doesn't necessarily increase our damage over time. It only increases our hit. Next, we take deadly venoms for damage boosts and debilitating toxins just for more damage reduction. We also take rigid finesse for the damage boost against non-bosses. We also take a second wind for more lucky hit chance, which is useful for enabling our aspects. And last, we take exposure, mostly for stun grenades, so we can utilize the frostbitten aspect to insta-freeze the enemies. And the cooldown reduction to our trap is also huge for a quality of life. Now let's talk about gear and aspects. On the helmets, the best in slot for the affixes would be +4 poison imbuement, cooldown reduction, basic attack speed, and max life or armor. And I'm using enshrouding aspects for more damage reduction on our dark shroud. Now on the chest piece, the best in slot would be the triple DR, which are generic damage reduction to close enemies, damage reduction to poison enemies, and armor or maximum life. For the aspect, we are using Aspect of Might, which has 20% damage reduction whenever we are using our basic skill. Now on the gloves, I think the best in slot will be +4 rapid fire, lucky hit chance, attack speed, and crit chance. But since I have never got any of them, so I'm using a 5% chance to heal on lucky hit instead of attack speed, which is pretty niche. I still need to press my potion to heal, but the other good affix, in my opinion, will be the chance to slow on lucky hit, because we are using Creeping Death's Wrathful Heart. It effectively provides a damage boost for the build. For the aspect, we are using Frostbitten aspect, which works pretty well with caltrops plus exposure for insta-freezing the enemies. Then on the pants, the best in slot will be anything that grants damage reduction and +4 dark shroud. For the aspects, I use the aspect of disobedience since my armor is pretty low, so it helps a little bit, especially since we are a damage over time build. We don't really need to worry about keeping up the stacks. Then on the boots, the implicits actually matters. I got attacks reduce evades cooldown, which is game changing for you to gain a better position when you are dealing with packs of mobs. For the affixes, the best in slot will be movement speed, damage reduction while injured, and I found that a shrine duration is pretty nice and dexterity just so you get more damage. I only rolled for dodge chance because I probably will make a new character that utilize dodge in the future. So there is that. So for the aspect, I'm using Manglers for daze and triggering knockdown with trick attacks passive. So we got more damage for damage over time from creeping death. It's also nice to have daze when you are dealing with bunch of mobs and knock down some of them. Now, before we take a look at the weapon, I want you guys to hear me out on this one. You guys are probably already familiar with the term of damage bucket, which is already pretty well known in Diablo 4 community. If you don't know, you probably need to watch other content creators explaining the damage theory for Diablo 4. Now, the quick bottom line is that there are 4 damage buckets, which are the main stats, crit, vulnerable damage, and 1 bucket of all the additives. It's important to remain skeptical on this one because it is called a theory, so there can be a mistake. And I believe there are a mistake, especially on the additive buckets. My theory is that there is more than 1 bucket for all the additives. I'm not going to explain everything in detail in this video. The one thing you have got to understand is there are affixes that increase your tooltip damage, and there are also affixes that don't increase the tooltip damage. Now we can call this a base damage multiplier and non-base damage multiplier. And I think the 2 of these are on the separate buckets. From my in-game testing, I'm like 80% sure this is the case. The other 20% is because I don't have a mathematical proof to back up my theory. Remember, it's important to remain skeptical. Now, I will display some of the affixes for this build that fall into each category. This is not a full list, but it is the one that I have tested so far. Now, how do we make a decision based on this theory? I believe to get the most DPS for your build, it's going to have an equal amount of additive damage for each bucket. Now, let's continue and take a look at my weapons. For the crossbow, you need a crossbow with a high item power. Since our poison damage scales from base damage, it's important to get a crossbow with a high item power. Now for the stats, we have the best in slot, which will be vulnerable damage, or skill damage, dexterity, all stats. For the aspect, I'm using the repeating aspect. It's mostly for clearing packs of mobs, and since rapid fire mob clearing is pretty bad, this aspect helps to solve those problems. Next is my dagger. The best in slot affixes pretty much the same as crossbow. Vulnerable damage, or skill damage, dexterity, and all stats. I personally prefer using a dagger rather than a sword because of the higher base attack speed for our puncture. It reduces the clunkiness of stacking 3 combo points, and the implicit is better for a damage over time build. And for the aspect, we are using accelerating aspect for more attack speed on our puncture. You technically can change it with another damage aspect, but I wouldn't recommend it because it makes stacking combo points really slow. And for the aspect on the other dagger, we have aspect of corruption for more DPS. Now, let's talk about jewelry. First, we have this amulet, which has 4 offensive stats, which is pretty greedy. In my opinion, the best in slot would be cooldown reduction, +3 deadly venoms or malice, +3 all imbuements, and +3 subterfuge skills to get level 12 Dark Shroud, which has insane damage reduction. but I couldn't find one. And since I'm playing solo self-found the entire time, it's really hard to get them, especially with the correct color of Malignant Hearts. Speaking of Malignant Hearts, we are using Trickery Brutal Heart, which is in my opinion the most fun Malignant Heart in the entire game. Like, this heart just single-handedly saved the Season 1 patch for me and keeps me wanting to log in to the game. We are using a poison trap to trigger the Tauncy pack, and it gives us extra crowd control for extra damage over time from our ripping. That's hard. For the aspect, we are using Ambrose aspects. It's important to put them in the amulet for a 90% chance to gain shroud stacks since our defense is heavily relying on them. And next, we have both rings. The best in slot will be max life, crit chance, lucky hit chance, and vulnerable or poison damage. And for the malignant hearts, I'm using ripping that for extra damage over time. We effectively have 7 kinds of crowd control, which is chill, freeze, stun, blow, daze, knockdown, and taunt. Of course, not all of them is going to active all the time, but it's pretty neat and we got the most out of it. The more common alternatives would be the barber, since they fixed it after the patch 1.1.1. I personally haven't tested yet, but it's probably comparable in terms of damage versus bosses, but it probably feels really clunky versus mob. And for the other malignant hearts, I choose cluster munition hearts just for more stun grenades to procs our frostbitten aspects. And for the aspect, we are using bursting venoms just to maintain our poison imbuements, and we also use the rapid aspect for more attack speed. Now into the Paragon Boards. I think it's pretty min-max already, and in my experience, the best way to scale poison damage over time is through the glyph. So we take 6 Paragon Boards. The path itself is pretty straightforward. First, we take all the dexterity node for our Ranger glyph. If you are still level 60 or 70 and still grinding your level up, you can slot in the efficacy glyph. It gives an immediate damage boost with the additional 20% imbuement potency. And you don't have to level them first. You can level another glyph for early push nightmare dungeons. And for the next board, we take exploit weakness boards and path towards the glyph, and we are socketing tracker glyph. I think you can also use canny glyph. It's comparable, but I think tracker is the best for my build. We also take the legendary nodes over here. And then we are going to the left, and we take the cunning stratagem boards and the path towards the nearest glyph and sockets in efficacy that I mentioned early on. It's a pretty solid boost to our core skill damage, and it also gives us a flat armor, which is pretty important after the disobedience nerf. Now, in my early progression board that you can find in my previous video, you can see that I took cunning stratagem legendary nodes, which effectively gives us +1 arrow to rapid fire when we spend 3 combo points. On the one hand, it seems really good for poison builds since more arrows equals more poison stacks, right? But on the other hand, it takes too many points to get there, and I think it's not worth it. I'd rather have an extra glyph that boosts my 8 arrows than have a 9 weaker arrows. So there's that. Next board is pretty simple. We take a damage reduction from Safeguard and path towards the legendary node Chip Shot. Next, we path towards the glyph sockets and socketing in the control glyphs. The additional bonus is great for this build since we can insta-freeze and stun the mobs all the time, so it's pretty much up all the time. The damage to crowd control itself is also nice, but not as important as the other glyphs. So we only take 27 intelligence points just to activate the additional bonus itself. Next we path to the left and take no witnesses boards, and we path towards the glyph and use the Bane glyph, pretty much taking all the strength nodes and all the rare nodes nearby. Moving on to the last board on the right side, we are using Deadly Ambush board just because it has the most strength nodes near the glyph nodes, and socketing in Exploit glyph and taking the damage reduction nodes and all the strength nodes. And with all these things, I believe this is the most optimal setup for my build. And with this, I believe I have covered everything. If you are looking for some gameplay footage, you can watch all my previous video, and I also have live stream footage so you can see how it actually performs. I hope you enjoy my builds and learn something from this video. Let me know in the comments if you have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel if you want more ARPG content like Diablo and Path of Exile, and click the like button if you like the content of the video. Really appreciate it. That's it from me for now. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.